actions are motivated by numerous factors that are oftentimes interconnected with each other. So for example, using OG's characterization, when people insist that women need to be protected, and for that reason we must keep them in-house, it could be motivated by benevolent sexism, but it could also be a rhetoric used by people that are malevolently sexist, or it could be motivated by reasons of self-interest or religion. We don't know which one is the root cause. So in that sense, this motion asks us to do the impossible of finding what the greatest cause is, or what the root cause of that problem is. And for that reason, we must assume a hypothetical scenario in this motion where people truly practice benevolent sexism, and whether or not that person would contribute to the movement that protects women's rights in general, or it goes against it. And that's what we're going to do on the closing opposition. A couple of observations regarding opening government before I move on to my extension. Firstly, as I've already kind of insinuated, I think they're incredibly unclear on whether or not this is the greatest obstacle. They kind of go about this question without really answering the POI that I gave to the Prime Minister speech. Our claim is that it is actions that OG characterize are oftentimes a result of a combination of multiple different factors. And what OG needed to do is to show that this narrative, for example, creates a whole new set of, a whole new generation of sexist people that wouldn't have become sexist without this narrative, which I don't think OG did in this debate, unfortunately. Secondly, I think they operate under a very nebulous and unclear, inconsistent context, I would say, because while they claim that this motion should be about the status quo, they also kind of imagine a world where the norm that women should stay in-house is particularly dominant. I'm not sure where they live in or to what extent they believe in the scale of sexism. I would argue that they concede to our case or our view of the world where women are pretty much under discrimination in many places around the world. A little bit of comments on CG then. I think their main extension is the idea that it is difficult for women to reject proposals that merit women or that seemingly merit women because they are seen as actions of benevolence. Two responses. Firstly, I think you need to recognize the comparative, because often it is way more difficult for women to challenge things that are more pressuring, i.e. Malevolent sexism. It is difficult for women to stand up against your boss when they are confrontational to you. I think they don't recognize that comparative. In fact, the problem about power imbalance, which is their second mechanism, is completely symmetrical on the both sides. So I would argue that it is much easier for women to challenge on the our side of the house. But secondly, yes, you can challenge. And if it is not an important job, you don't need to challenge, is our claim. And it's going to be on our extension. I don't understand why, tedious jobs or troublesome jobs are necessary for women to progress. I don't think CG explained this. So our first extension is going to explain why benevolent sexism is actually a key driver for progress. This is different from opening opposition because their claim is that hostile sexism is worse, and they give a nebulous comparison, which I don't think is resolved in the opening debate. Our claim is that it is actually positive, and for that reason, it is definitely not the greatest obstacle. So let's use OG's characterization. Their characterization is that media has a huge influence. People are educated from young age, and that's why people believe in this particular form of sexism. I agree. For example, the idea of chivalry in the West is particularly plausible, particularly palatable to a lot of the people that are oftentimes conservative as well. Our claim is that this is oftentimes a first step towards inclusion and eventual success of women, and therefore is not the greatest obstacle. Why is that the case? Firstly, it allows the feminist movement or women in general to convince other men who are particularly and oftentimes conservative in these contexts. For example, when women say that I am not happy when I am forced to stay at home, how would you react? I would argue that people that practice and believe in benevolent sexism, their reaction would be to ask themselves whether or not this is the best option for that woman in front of you, because obviously it is not the case that you're protecting women insofar as you're asking her to do something that she's not happy with. So it creates the norm that it is wrong to go against what women want to do, and therefore actually gives agency to women. And in that sense, it is able to include men into the movement, which is necessary for feminism to do anything in areas where resources are lacking. Secondly, it gives feminists the weapon to accuse people that are anti-feminists, because now you can claim that women are hurt. And to the extent people for example, in society at a great scale practice benevolent sexism, when women claim I'm hurt by these sexist, for example, you would have the leverage of asking the society in general to criticize, to frame out those people that are attacking feminism. That is important because women can now have a claim against sexist barriers that exist in society, which I also think is important. The conclusion of that is that it actually promotes the progression of women in society. For example, you have far more protection of women in corporate structures, offering them mechanisms to escape, for example, things like sexual harassment. Or you have more cases of affirmative action. We understand that these are not perfect, but definitely are beneficial for women's progress, particularly in contexts where they don't have that resources in the status quo. Before I move on to explaining why that's the case, yes, OG.
I think we characterize that these narratives are made by men, which means that the meaning of protect is also shaped by men, which means that it is not necessarily aligned with the woman's interest.
I mean, the first response is that if you think protecting women is important, when women are not protected because they say that they're not protected at home, they have other things they want to do, obviously you should listen to them. Is the norm that we stand behind on the our side of the house? But secondly, if people are not convinced by that particular narrative, I would say that the cause of that person or like the motivation that's fundamental in that person is different. For example, the idea that women are less capable or not rational at all so that they cannot make decisions for themselves. That is not benevolent sexism, which proves that the obstacle is something else. That's your burden in this debate, which you did not accomplish. So we understand that this is not perfect, but oftentimes having women leader, for example, allows better management of corporations that are more capable of including women into the structure. Oftentimes they work as a symbol which motivates more and more women to come to workplace. I think that's in the long term very important. Obviously, OG's claim was that Western countries, we need to look at the reality. Yeah, maybe this doesn't apply in Western progressive countries, but the majority of women are suffering in developing countries, which we think is the more important context in this debate. So on the question of weighing, we think our context is far more important. And for that reason, definitely it is not the greatest obstacle. In fact, it is a good facilitator of the movement, and that is why we propose.
3, 2, 1. Thank you very much, Chairperson. Good morning, everyone. Long time no see. I have come back to this debate community, and I'm enjoying this tournament very much. I would like to evaluate this round from 3 criteria. First of all, what is the parameter for the term greatest obstacle? Secondly, what's the ways in which we understand the realistic mechanism and likelihood of achieving the near-term tangible success of women? Thirdly, what is the realistic milestone and a timeline for the progress for change? First of all, what is the parameter for the term greatest? This is a direct engagement to opening government. 2 things here. Firstly, this debate is not about there are some good aspects or bad aspects of many different kinds of narratives. What the burden of proof that opening government has to prove in this debate is why, in general, this benevolent narrative has inherent structure to become the worst narrative that we have in a society. Just by providing some bad aspect of benevolent sexism isn't good enough for opening government to prove that burden of proof in this debate. How they fail in that in 2 ways. First of all, the Prime Minister's logic is very dependent on the context. There are some contexts in which traditionally male can justify by utilizing this rhetoric to stop any progress further. Yeah, there are some contexts that exist as such, but there are many other different contexts in which this sort of benevolent sexism is necessary to compel men to trade off their rights against the interests of women. The conclusion is that, their conditions and context is very narrow. Therefore, they can't just prove that this is the greatest obstacle as long as there are both paradigm narratives exist in this debate. Both two different worlds exist in this debate. On second level, Prime Minister even explained even further than that. There are some unique aspects of oppression which is inherent in benevolent sexism. So there are some bad people who are abusing these rhetorics. But we understand there are some limited number of bad people who are leveraging or abusing these rhetorics to discriminate women. But that's a sweeping generalization to say that this narrative is worst in all circumstances. So we need to focus on those who actually believe in this benevolent sexism and practices for the purpose of good. And that's the main characterization that should come out in this debate. And that's how Tota extended in his speech. So by contrast, we have provided there are a plethora of positive aspects which is inherent in benevolent sexism, and that's our second extension. So conclusion in this metric and parameter is that as long as opening government pointed out some negative aspects of benevolent sexism and some positive aspects of other sexism, they haven't sufficiently proven that this is being the greatest obstacle in this debate. Therefore, OG is already kicked out in this debate. Secondly, what is the realistic mechanism and likelihood of achieving a near-term tangible success of women? And this is a direct engagement and comparison with the opening opposition. So opening opposition nicely explained that hostile sexism is harmful, but what they lack is the counterfactual. Why benevolent sexism is better and thereby having stronger power to spearhead the success of the larger number of women. We have extended a lot of reasons why, and benevolent sexism play a positive role in our society, thereby showing that this is not the greatest obstacle. What is the key drivers and key logics that we have provided in this debate? Two things here. Firstly, benevolent sexism is effective to persuade counterparts male. This logic is vital and important because we need to focus on the number. That's the base metrics that open opposition and open government focused on. In order to maximize the number of supporters, it is necessary to persuade the male counterparts as well and include them into the movement of feminism and include the movement of social progress. In order to do so, this metric of benevolence is necessary, and this is vital because we need to make the movement sustainable. In order to create a democratic change, we need to get as many votes as possible from male counterparts as well. Therefore, this notion of benevolence is critical. On the second level, what Tota explained is that women are able to weaponize these rhetorics to defend their career, to defend their interests and autonomy. This logic is also vital in this debate because we, closing opposition, are willing to engage with the worst scenario in this debate. We are happy to engage with the worst circumstance. That is to say, women can be oppressed, can be suppressed in our society. In the worst circumstance, with the last guardian and last option that women have is to weaponize this rhetoric. Hey, please listen to me. Respect my agency. Respect my choice. I want to do this. I want to pursue my career. Therefore, protect us. This sort of counter-narrative or countervailing views and rhetorics is the only last weapon that women are able to resort in this worst circumstance. Therefore, this logic is vital in this debate. Conclusion is that benevolent sexism is really good because it empowers women in many circumstances, even including developing nations, unlike very narrow scope of the first world countries in this debate. Therefore, it's hard to prove and it is hard to assert that benevolent sexism is the greatest and worst obstacle in our society. I'd like to take a point from opening. Go ahead.
So I think the root cause of why these benevolent sexism happens is, for instance, that there's a narrative that women are inferior than men, therefore we have to protect. What is the exact sexism that is benevolent on your side of the house?
No, I think that's already conceded by opening government, and opening government and closing government as well, that the sense of appreciation, we need to give the remedy to women as much as possible. This sort of arbitrary and extra protection is needed for women because they are fundamentally incapable of defending up against standing up for their own rights. Therefore, we need this kind of a presumptuous intervention. And that's the kind of characterization exactly given by closing government. And this is actually good. That is my third parameter in this debate. What's the realistic milestone and timeline of this debate? What closing government explained in this debate is that this benevolent sexism is difficult to accuse, and it's hard for men to realize that they are offensive. I think that is good. Why? Because one, this is a fast entry barrier for men to become aware of the issues related to feminism and women's rights. It's much better for men to become some sort of to be helpful for women to become the ally of women rather than trying to push their own agenda. Secondly, for women, closing government considered that there's some practical merits for women. And that's better because in a context in which it is traditional norm exists, it is very difficult to materialize even some sort of tangible benefit, even some minor tangible benefit for women. In that specific context, it is great that some practical merits and benefits are materialized because of this narrative. Therefore, in a near term, in a short term, we believe this benevolent feminism, benevolent sexism is good. It's hard to achieve genuine equality. That takes up time in the long term. We need to prioritize the effect. Thank you.